Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Sunday night video. This week I am covering the very tragic story of Mary Nicholson, often referred to as the Little Staindrop poisoner, and the murder of Elizabeth Atkinson, which took place in the Durham area in 1798. Now, I have to admit that this story is a little different to usual, as there is very little detail of the trial or the inquest, etc., due to the age of the crime. So I have researched various different articles, and this story is basically my take on those that I have found. And as I will mention as the story progresses, the information is often different from article to article, so the full truth of the case is quite hard to discover. Anyway, I do hope that you will find the story interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. It is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money at all, but it really does help to support the channel. And I would just like to add, as I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify. So I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. As you can imagine, the past lives of those involved in this week's story were impossible to find. Census details are usually a great source of information, but census taking did not begin until 1841, so there are no records prior to that can be clearly traced to the victim or the murderer. It is, however, known that Mary Nicholson was an orphan, and that she also did not seem to have any family living in the Durham area. She was said to be of weak intellect. However, this was simply just another way to describe the fact that she was illiterate. Her age is not given in any of the articles that I have read, but it is to be assumed that she was still quite young. Elizabeth Atkinson, the victim, was the elderly mother of John Atkinson, who had employed Mary as a servant at the home that he shared with Elizabeth and other family members in the Durham area. She was said to be around 76 years old at the time of her death, so she would have been born in around 1722. Her place of birth is unknown. Mary was lucky enough to find employment in the village of Bishopton near Durham as a servant for John Atkinson and his family. She was, however, somewhat shocked to find that some of her duties were not quite as she had expected, as Mr. Atkinson saw no reason not to take advantage of the young servant girl. Now, this was something that was not uncommon, as the master of servants would know that the young girls would have nowhere to go if they gave up their jobs, so would often suffer in silence. Mary, however, did not want to do this. She was very upset that John had abused her and decided that she would get her revenge. She went into Darlington, where she bought some arsenic, and it's said that she told the shopkeeper that she needed this to wash some sheep. Once she had returned to the family home, she mixed the arsenic into some flour that she knew would later be used to make a pudding for John Atkinson. John was away on business at that time and was due home later that day. Mary left the flour mixture in the kitchen and thought no more of it. However, on John's return, he said that he was not hungry and did not want the pudding to be made. John's mother Elizabeth then decided that she would bake something else with the flour mixture. And this is where the story differs in several articles, with some saying that she baked a loaf of bread, while others say that she baked a cake. However, whatever she baked, the entire family, apart from John Atkinson and Mary Nicholson, all ate some of the food and all became quite ill. A doctor was sent for and he treated his patients well, as all but Elizabeth recovered quickly. But sadly, Elizabeth died from arsenic poisoning a short time later, with some articles saying it was just days and others saying it was a few weeks before she died. Some reports say that Mary was greatly distressed by the death of Elizabeth and that she had confessed to 3 people that she had not intended the poison to be taken by anyone other than John, while other articles simply state that John had believed Mary to be the reason why his mother had died. But whatever version is true, it seems that John told Mary that he would take no further action as long as she left his service and did not return to the house ever again. Mary left, but she had nowhere to go and no money to survive, and the chance of getting another job without a reference would be virtually impossible. She wandered around for a while before knocking on the door of a house belonging to a Mr. Ord, saying that she was cold, lost and wet and had nowhere to go. He had no reason to fear the girl, so he gave her a bed for the night. Now a lot is made of this in some articles, saying that if he had known what she had done, would he have taken her in so easily. But in all honesty, I do not believe that Mr. Ord was in any danger from Mary. Mary, however, was still distressed at the death of Elizabeth Atkinson, and perhaps knowing that she could not wander the streets forever, decided to return to the house of John Atkinson the following day. And once there, she told him he could send her to prison if he wished, also telling him that she was very sorry for what she had done. John did send for the police and he told them the whole sorry story, and Mary was arrested for the willful murder of Elizabeth Atkinson, and she was to take her trial at Durham that summer. There were no details that I was able to find of any inquest into the death of Elizabeth Atkinson. And I also did not find any details of a funeral for Elizabeth Atkinson. However, I did not actually expect to find anything, as the details of the whole case are very basic in most articles, so it would have been unlikely that the funeral would have been covered. However, I do expect that it would have been covered fully in the papers at the time. Elizabeth was buried at St. Peter's Churchyard in Bishopton. However, I did not find any evidence of a headstone for her in the churchyard there. Mary's trial did indeed take place at Durham in the summer of 1798. There are no details of the trial that I've been able to find, other than the fact that Mary was undefended. And Mary was found guilty of the willful murder of Elizabeth Atkinson and was sentenced to death. However, questions were raised as to how Mary could be found guilty of premeditated murder when she had not been intending to kill Elizabeth and that the poison was intended for someone else. Now this resulted in Mary getting a short reprieve while the case was looked into again. Now this apparently ended up taking 12 long months, and during this time Mary was kept in the House of Correction in Durham, and this was once located underneath the bridge that crossed the river in Durham. She also found herself apparently used to run errands for those in charge, and although I have to admit if this was true, then they clearly trusted her enough not to run away. And it's also stated that during this time the people of Durham got to know Mary well, and it seems that she was well liked by many who found her to be a polite, kind young girl. A year later, the judge sat again at Durham with the intention of resolving the case of Mary Nicholson. Although no details seem to be available as to why, the judge found in favour of the first trial, and Mary was once again found guilty and sentenced to be hanged. It is said in some articles that many people of Durham were shocked at the outcome, most believing that she was not guilty, and others that she had not been intelligent enough to realise that arsenic would not just make her victim ill, but that it could actually kill them. However, her execution date was set for June the 22nd, 1799. On the day of the execution, Mary was taken by cart to Framwellgate Moor, where a huge crowd had gathered to witness her death. But it must be said that these were not just the normal crowds of people wishing to see a hanging. This was a crowd made up of many people who now liked and cared for Mary and wanted to be there with her until the end. Mary was placed below the rope still on the cart. The rope was then placed around her neck and the cart was removed. It seemed at first that death would come quickly, but suddenly the rope snapped and Mary, half alive, fell to the ground. The crowd watched on in horror. Many then began to say that this was a sign from God and Mary would surely now be saved. But this, however, was not the case. Poor Mary, no doubt in great pain, was left to wait for almost an hour while another rope was sent for. Some articles strangely talk of her chatting with friends while she waited, one even saying that she sat drinking tea, but I feel that these were simply stories passed down over the years that adapted the truth, as after hanging for a few minutes, it's unlikely that the poor girl would have been able to speak, let alone drink tea. Once the new rope was in place, Mary was once more placed below it, and this time there would be no reprieve, and a few minutes later Mary had paid the price for the death of Elizabeth Atkinson. I found no details of what happened to Mary after this. However, it is sadly quite possible that her body would have been taken for medical science, as the Act of 1752 had allowed this to be possible. And I certainly found no evidence of a grave for Mary anywhere in the area. This was a very tragic story. I know that in this case we have very little information to go on, but I can fully understand poor Mary's distress at the abuse she received from John Atkinson, and I can understand why she would want to get her revenge for his actions. But as a girl who was said to be illiterate and perhaps not aware of the results of arsenic on humans, I cannot truly believe that she planned to kill John. I believe she simply wanted to make him ill. And I also don't believe that she would have been aware that Elizabeth would take the unused arsenic mixture and bake with it. Perhaps she'd even intended to get rid of it, but had not had time to do so. She most definitely did not know that the entire family would end up ill after eating what Elizabeth had baked, or that Elizabeth would die from poisoning. Was she guilty of murder? Well, in my opinion, she was not. She was, at best, guilty of manslaughter, and only really guilty of buying the arsenic and mixing it in the flour. I think the jury at the trial came to the wrong verdict, and the second judge did not really seem to look into the case, simply agreeing with the earlier verdict. I feel that Mary should never have been hanged, and that at best she should have spent a short time in prison. And I also cannot believe that after the rope snapped, she was forced to wait for an hour for another one to be found. But what do you think? Do you think Mary was guilty of murder, especially when the victim was not even the person she had bought the arsenic for? Do you think that she should have been hanged, or should she have been sent to prison for manslaughter? And when the rope snapped, do you think that she should have been forced to wait for another to be found, or should this have been the time when they finally decided that death was not the right verdict for Mary Nicholson? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this incredibly sad and tragic story interesting, and I must add here that I wasn't able to get any location photos for this story, so I have had to use photos that are simply of the Durham area, so I am sorry about that, as I do like to try and get location photos whenever possible. Anyway, I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.